Welcome back. If you're joining us again today or just tuning in today, get ready for an amazing lineup of speakers. For those who are just tuning in, TEDx Ohio State University hosts an annual main event where we feature Ohio State's best and brightest ideas. If you're looking for more information about TED, TEDx, or what our organization does, you can go to TEDx.OSU.edu for more information. Once again, we encourage you to listen to these talks with your hearts and minds open, and to discuss with your friends and family what you hear today. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to the second day of the TEDx Ohio State University main conference, Horizons. Thank you for joining us, and thanks again to the Office of Student Life, University Advancement, the OSU Alumni Association, and all of our independent partners for making this possible. We hope that yesterday's talks were insightful and informative, and that you are just as excited as we are to learn more today.
They say hindsight is 20/20, and last year certainly proved that to be true. As a year full of shifting circumstances, amplifying voices, and finding creative solutions to problems new and old, we now must stop and consider how to take these new concepts into the future.
To better understand our society, sometimes this means evaluating its specific parts, the economics, the politics, the inner workings.
And other times, it's taking a step back and evaluating how all of these factors interconnect with one another, seeing it in the structure, the system, the whole picture, if you will.
The various forms of bigotry that we see and experience are often rooted in that system, those cultural and ideological issues.
Our next speaker is Luther Young, a sociology PhD student here at OSU who studies the inherent relationship of isms, such as sexism, ableism, and racism, and how these all share common roots in white supremacy. Please welcome Luther Young to the stage.
Let's talk about race. Now, I can't see your faces, but I'm sure some of you just thought to yourself, oh, here we go, another conversation about race. In fact, some of you became incredibly uncomfortable as soon as I said the word race. But feeling uncomfortable talking about race pales in comparison to actually experiencing racial discrimination. Every day, millions of Black and brown people leave their homes under the very real threat of racism and violence. Parents of Black and brown children have conversations with them to prepare them for the inevitable racism they will encounter. I recall having such conversations in my own family, with people telling me how to interact around white people so that they don't feel threatened by me, or how to engage with police officers so that they don't perceive me as a threat. Such conversations proved necessary because when I was about 18 years old, I'm driving a group of friends home from dinner when I'm pulled over by a police officer. When I come to a complete stop, the officer springs from his vehicle, runs over to my car, pounds on my window so hard I thought the glass was gonna break, points his gun in my face and shouts, "Let me see your effing hands." He then rips open my car door, reaches inside as if he's going to pull me out until he realizes I'm still strapped into my seatbelt, and he continues pointing his gun at me and shouting and cursing at me. I try to reason with this officer, but he gets even more agitated, and he calls for backup, and within minutes, I'm completely surrounded by cop cars and police officers. I'm ordered out of my vehicle and placed on the hood of a police cruiser. After being interrogated for what seems like an eternity, they finally tell me what all this is about. Allegedly, I had been speeding. Luckily, I was able to walk away that night unharmed, at least not physically harmed. And I like to think that's because I had a community of people looking out for my protection. But unfortunately, this community, the Black community, did not offer the same level of protection when I came out as a member of the LGBTQ community a few years later. In fact, this same community was instrumental in perpetuating homophobic violence. And what was perhaps more distressing is that a lot of the homophobic rhetoric I heard in the Black community sounded a lot like the racist rhetoric I heard from white people. And over time, I realized that the arguments that any one group would use to discriminate against another group was virtually the same. Let's look at a couple of examples. For instance, some root their discrimination against others in religious beliefs. White folks have used religion to justify racism, claiming that slavery was their God-given right, and that Jim Crow segregation was necessary because God intended for the races to be separate. Folks have used religion to advance homophobic views, claiming that non-heterosexual relationships are immoral. Folks have used religion to advance sexist views, claiming that God placed men in charge and for women to be submissive. Folks have used religion to advance transphobic views, claiming that God created only two genders and that trans and non-binary identities are simply invalid. Folks have used religion to advance classist rhetoric, claiming that wealth is a sign of God's prosperity and poverty is a sign of God's judgment. Folks have used the Bible to advance ableist views, depicting those with disabilities as being unclean, demon-possessed, or somehow in need of being changed. The arguments are all the same. In addition to religion, some folks root their discrimination of others in beliefs about nature or biology, claiming that some people, such as white people and cisgender men, are just naturally superior, whereas others like the LGBTQ community and individuals with disabilities are unnatural or abnormal. The arguments are the same. And all of these arguments, all of these various kinds of discrimination are all rooted in white supremacy. White supremacy is an ideology that places people in a hierarchy. And at the top of this hierarchy is whiteness. Now, it's important to note that whiteness is not just about skin color, but rather whiteness represents an ideal type of person that is considered the most worthy and valuable in our society. And this takes into account their race, but also gender, sexual orientation, ability, and class status. And so in our society, the most valued person is white, cisgender, heterosexual, male, able-bodied, and wealthy. And any individual who does not fit this ideal type falls somewhere else in this hierarchy. Now, the interesting thing about white supremacy is that we are all socialized to believe that whiteness is something we should strive toward, even though only a handful of people will actually truly obtain this ideal. And so individuals who are on the lower levels of this hierarchy will fight tooth and nail, literally killing themselves, trying to get as close to whiteness as possible, even if that means stepping on other people and other groups in the process. And in this way, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and classism are all white supremacist ideologies. Now, we don't often think about white supremacy in this way, and this is part of its brilliant design. When we hear the word race, we almost automatically think about people of color and not white people. Similar to when we hear the word sexuality, we almost immediately think about non-heterosexual people and not straight people. And this is because whiteness has become so normalized in our society that we don't think about it. We don't even see it. And anything that is not whiteness becomes other and sticks out like a sore thumb. And this allows whiteness to continue to grow and operate in the shadows. Even those of us who are social justice minded fall into this trap because we're often so focused on people who are oppressed, the people being stepped on, that we don't take a critical look at the ones doing the stepping. And in a sense, we're only focusing on symptoms, but not the disease itself. And this allows white supremacy to perpetuate itself. So, what's the solution? How can we try to fix this? For starters, we have to see whiteness and acknowledge the pervasiveness of white supremacy in our society. And this means that colorblindness is not an option. You know, I often hear people say things like, oh, I don't see race, I don't see color, I just see people as people. And while this may sound virtuous on the surface, it is incredibly harmful because if we don't see diversity and difference among people, then we can't possibly see the discrimination that people face on a daily basis. And if we don't see this discrimination, we can't devise solutions to end their oppression. And once we see whiteness, we have to attack the issue of white supremacy from all angles. This means that we can't just try to chop off individual branches of discrimination. We need to uproot the whole tree. When I think back to my unfortunate encounter with police nearly a decade ago, I'm sad to say that not much has changed. Sure, we've made some movement in our efforts for social justice, but the issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and classism are still incredibly pervasive in our society today. And I argue that this is because while we have been working hard, we have not been working together. And our failure to acknowledge all of these various isms as stemming from the same root has made our efforts for equity and justice less effective. This work is going to take all of us, because although this system of white supremacy appears to benefit a handful of people, it is actually detrimental to the whole of our society, and it is silently killing each and every one of us. So, let's get to work and let's work together. Let's talk about race and white supremacy, because doing so could save your life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luther, for prompting us to consider the many isms at work in our society and their cultural roots. Truly, understanding the roots is what allows us to sprout change in our mind, body, and environment.
And while we're on the topic of mind and body, we all know to eat our fruits and veggies because they keep us healthy. But keeping us healthy means keeping the plants healthy, means keeping the soil healthy too. Our next speaker is very well versed in this concept and how it ties in with agriculture and sustainability.
The 2020 World Food Prize winner, Dr. Ratan Lal, is an environmental scientist and director of the Carbon Management and Sequestration Center. Dr. Lal is interested in how agriculture and soil health can help resolve global issues such as food insecurity and water quality. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Ratan Lal.
Soil and humanity are intricately interconnected. The word Adam comes from the Hebrew word Adamah, out of the earth. The word homo in Homo sapiens comes from the word humus, the Latin word, the decomposed organic matter in soil. Many cultures protect, cherish, and preach restoration of the Mother Earth. In Gurbani, Sikhism, Pawn Guru Pani Pita Mata Dhart Mahat. Wind is Guru, water is Father, the greatest of all is the Mother Earth. This preaching, this concept is more important now than ever before. There are 7.8 billion people on the earth, destined to be 9.8 billion by 2050. 11.4 billion by 2100. Their demands increasing with increasing affluence, and therefore we must protect and restore the capacity of the soil to produce ecosystem services. Food. 3.4 billion tons of food grain produced every year. Unfortunately, more than 1 billion ton reach no stomach, animal or human. They are wasted. Food waste indeed is a crime against nature, not acceptable. And yet, despite all that, almost 700 million people in the world are hungry. And this is not somewhere far corner of the world. It's right here in the United States, 40 million people. In Ohio, 1.7 million do not know where the next meal will come from. 500,000 children go to bed hungry. In addition to that, malnutrition problem. More than 2 billion people suffer from malnutrition. Deficiency of micronutrients, 17 of those micronutrients coming from the soil. And if they are not available, the impact on food quality impact soil health. And soil health relates to food quality. The fact remains The empty stomach, the fire that burns in it, is so ferocious, so hot, so intense, that it can only be quenched by the divine power in a loaf of bread made from grains grown on a healthy soil. There is no other media that can quench that thirst, that fire. The health of soil has also strong impact on climate change, and this is something not very much appreciated. The soil has been a source of greenhouse gases ever since the beginning of agriculture, 10,000 years ago. In fact, soils have contributed about 135 gigaton of carbon to the atmosphere. And if we can adopt better agricultural practices, soil can be a sink of atmospheric carbon dioxide. The capacity of the soil to absorb CO2 in the United States alone, 430 gigaton, that's billion tons, out of the total emission of 1,350 gigaton, almost 1/4 or 1/3 of the anthropogenic emission, both at national scale and at global scale, can be offset by carbon sequestration, soil and vegetation. Between 2020 and 2100, next 80 years, we can sequester as much as 330 gigaton of carbon in soil and biota. That translates to roughly 150 parts per million of drawdown of atmospheric CO2. But that's not enough to mitigate climate change. We must find alternate to fossil fuel emission to be able to offset whatever is being emitted by human activity. One should also never forget the fact that the health of soil depends on the soil organic matter content. We must have at least 3 to 4% of organic matter by weight in the top 50 centimeter in the root zone, because of the health of soil, plants, animal, people, environment, and the planet is one and indivisible. If the health of soil goes down, health of everything else goes down with it. The fact remains that the Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations are not on the track. And they are not on the track because the soils have been ignored. End poverty by 2030, achieve zero hunger by 2030, mitigate climate change by 2030, achieve land degradation neutrality by 2030. Those goals can only be met if the soil health is restored. And that restoration of soil health requires understanding the basic concept. For example, the marginal soil, the degraded soil, the soils which have been depleted and destroyed for their capacity, the marginal soils cultivated by marginal inputs produce marginal living and support marginal standards of life and well-being. Poor soils, poor climate also create climate refugees. In the US, we do not need to indicate what that has done. It has changed the politics of Europe by the people who have weathered the storm and jumped into the Mediterranean, disregarding whether they can make it or not across. And that concept indicates that people indeed are mirror image of the land they live on. And when people are suffering, miserable, desperate, starving, they pass their sufferings to the land. Unfortunately, the land reciprocates. And this vicious cycle of people's well-being not being met by the land and they passing their suffering to the land and reciprocates has to be brought to an end. And the entry point of that end point is the soil health, which must be restored and managed. But we are forgetting that. Mahatma Gandhi indicated that to forget how to dig the earth and to tend the soil is to forget ourselves. How dare we forget ourselves? How dare we forget where we came from? How dare we forget where we are destined to go? And with that, I say thank you, but never ever forget who we are and where we are going. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lal, for your insights into resource sustainability and combating global issues.
Our next speaker, Ramona Peel, is a political science professor here at Ohio State, the lead trainer for the Institute of LGBTQ+ Health Equity, and an advisor and advocate for transgender and gender non-conforming clients at Equitas Health Clinics.
Her work is committed to educating and creating a society that fully accepts transgender individuals and how that will benefit us all. Please join us in welcoming Ramona Peel.
On a snowy day, when I was 10 years old, I got the itch to go sledding. So my father took me to the hardware store, I picked out a sled, and I was in line with it. And he went over to look at hammers or something. And just to give you an idea of how I looked back then, here's how I looked. Just imagine that person, but all bundled up for winter. So this older guy walks by me and bumps into me. And he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, little girl." And I'm not paying attention, right? So I'm just confused. But my father just wheels on the guy and he starts yelling at him. "He's a boy. How can you think that he's a girl?" And I really thought in that moment that I was going to watch my father beat this guy because he thought I might be a girl. So that was really scary. And it was one of 1,000 little moments that told me that I had to push these feelings, that I was different, right? Had to push those feelings down. And it delayed my transition for another quarter century. At my lowest point, this is how I looked. So that fear that trans people feel, that fear of transitioning, it's rooted in reality. At time of recording, there is no federal law that protects trans and non-binary people from discrimination. So we're a vulnerable population. Trans folks are worried about getting and keeping a job. The rate of unemployment for trans people is 1/3 higher than the national rate. We are worried about being able to own a home or even keeping basic shelter over our heads. The rate of housing insecurity for trans folks is twice the national rate, and our home ownership rate is half of the national rate. And finally, we fear not just rejection, but we fear violence. In 2020, 37 trans people in the United States were murdered in hate crimes. The vast majority of them were Black trans women who have to try to survive at the intersection of transphobia and white supremacy, which makes them aggressively targeted by perpetrators of hate crimes. So what I do for a living is I'm a trainer for the Equitas Health Institute. You can see me doing my thing out in the field there. And among the many things organizations hire us to do, we're often hired because organizations want to do a better job serving the trans community. So I'll share these statistics with them, right? And they're often shocked, sometimes horrified, and they want to do better. They do. But sometimes I also get a vibe of, that's a shame. We should treat trans people better. But do we really have to change all these things about how we operate to cater to this small minority? What's in it for us? And today I want to talk about how creating a world where trans people have full citizenship, where we can use a bathroom without, being afraid of getting accosted or assaulted, where our names and our pronouns are respected. That's also a world where everyone will enjoy gender liberation. So when we're born, we're put into one of two boxes, the boy box or the girl box. And, we don't have a choice in that, right? We're babies, we're infants. But which box we're put in has a tremendous impact on the entire trajectory of our lives. It impacts how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to look, who we're supposed to love, what emotions are acceptable for us to express, and what emotions that we're expected to repress, right? And for trans folks, one of the big reasons why we face the bias and discrimination and prejudice that we do is we are living examples that not everybody fits in one of those two boxes. Not everybody is in the box that they should be in based on where they were put at birth, or both. But the boxes don't just negatively impact trans people. I think a lot about during the current global public health emergency, one of the things that's happened to women in the United States is that women are 4 times as likely as men to have lost their jobs or to have left the workforce, during this global crisis. And the reason for that is that the gendered norm that it should be women who take the primary responsibility of caring for children, of teaching children, during this emergency, that norm has aggressively reasserted itself. What about men? Well, in the US, 6 million men in the US suffer from depression, but they are much less likely than the rest of the public to seek help for mental health concerns. Why? Because men are not supposed to ask for help because of the box. I tried to survive in that box. I did. But finally, in my mid-30s, I transitioned. And I transitioned because my fear of what would happen to me if I came out got eclipsed by my fear of future regret, of how it would feel if I never even went over and saw what it was like in the other box. So this is a picture of me from a few years ago. Oh, hey, thanks Instagram filters. That's a good one. So I transitioned, and it was the best decision of my life. It really was. The fog of what Julia Serrano once called gender sadness lifted from me. But I wasn't done learning or evolving or growing. One thing that I learned after years of transitioning and after a lot of therapy was that I didn't want to stay in one box permanently. This box was much better. The new box was much better. But I didn't necessarily want to stay in that box permanently all the time. So I started to explore a greater range of gender expression. As you can see in this picture, recently I've really jumped into that exploration. And I mention this simply because instead of, for example, my decision to transition, which, though it was a good decision, was made out of fear, my decision to expand the boundaries of my gender expression, I made that decision out of hope. That I now can think about the future in a hopeful way rather than just worrying about avoiding the worst possible outcome. So the fight for trans liberation is in many ways just essentially making sure the doors of those boxes are at least unlocked for people. And the way that that is connected to gender liberation generally is this. So many of us haven't even asked these questions. Trans and non-binary folks are kind of forced to confront these questions, but most people aren't. So some of you may be very, very comfortable in the box that you were originally put in. You may feel connected to it. It fits for you. That's great. That's your authenticity, and that's awesome. But I do want everyone to think about this, particularly if maybe you're just meh about the box you're in. Think about whether that box has kept you from living your most authentic life. Has it kept you from jobs or hobbies that you think don't fit with the box that you were put in? Has it kept you from looking the way that you want to look or associating with people the way you want to? If the answers to any of those questions end up yes, this is not just an effort, a struggle for trans folks. It's an effort that will benefit everyone. We can create this better world where you don't have to fear stepping outside the boundaries of the box that you were put in. We can create a world where trans folks have full citizenship, equal rights, We can live in dignity. We can live openly and not be afraid of that bringing harm to us. That world is the one that I hope that we can build together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona, for sharing your work with transgender advocacy and how a trans-affirming society will benefit everyone.
Our next speaker is not a speaker, but a group of very talented individuals. The Art of Freedom Dabki troupe showcases the culture, artistry, and joy in dance. Dabki is a folk dance usually performed at weddings, but our performers have adjusted it to suit the modern day. Please welcome the Art of Freedom Dabki troupe.
My name is Khalil Qtaifan. I'm a pre-med undergraduate student at TEDxOhioStateUniversity and one of the co-captains of the Art of Freedom Dabki troupe. We're a dance group that was established in 2003 by a group of Palestinian Buckeyes who wanted to share their rich culture with the OSU community.
My name is Maram Suleiman. I'm a pre-P undergrad student studying health sciences at The Ohio State University and a member of the Art of Freedom Dabki troupe. Dabki is a traditional Levantine folk dance that's based on synchronized leg movement and foot stomping. It is said to have originated thousands of years ago when villagers would come together to help their neighbors repair their homes. During the rainy season, the roofs, which are made out of mud, would crack and the community or family members would come to help patch it up. They would collect the wheat, mud, and supplies required, then form a line, joining hands and stomping the mud into place. As roof building developed, this tradition was passed as a dance through generations as a reminder of the importance of family, community, tradition, and solidarity. Today it's very popular in current-day countries like Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Jordan. There are many variations of the dance, but performers are typically aligned in a straight line or a semicircle, and is performed at weddings and other joyous occasions. Our group currently has over 20 members, and since our establishment, we have performed at dozens of cultural events on college campuses and weddings across the state of Ohio. You probably recognize us at popular campus events like Taste of OSU, Arab Night, or from our social media where we have a combined 1.5 million views of our performances.
Dabki is more than just a dance to us. Many of us on the team, including myself, are Palestinian and descendants of refugees who are unable to visit their homeland. So Dabki has become a creative form of art that symbolizes courage and defiance against injustice. You know, the physical arrangement of a group, the synchronized movement of stomping together, holding hands in unity, all this expresses a powerful narrative of existence, resilience, and love for life. So when we dance, we're not just showcasing our culture, but we're reaffirming and preserving our Palestinian identity with hopes of returning one day. We always have such a great time practicing and performing. It's so fun and inclusive to all those who want to learn and join. Our feet hit the ground with pride, and our hands interlock as a symbol of solidarity with all those struggling around the world. We're excited to share part of our culture with you, and hope you enjoy it as much as we do.
وتعيني صلوا على النبي يا الحاضرين، صلاة النبي تنفع وتعيني. او يا ابو مراد عراسي وعيني، انت معذبنا وغيرك ما يكون. زعفولو زعفولو يعيشون. العب يا ابو. كبار كبار. يا بيه يا بيه. يلا 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 يلا. هي 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 هي. ايوه ايوه. هلو هلو هلو. زافولن يا جماعه، زافولن يا شباب. يعيشوا حريه. لك يلي سافرتوا خذونا معاكم، الله يصبرنا على فرقاكم. يلي سافرتوا خذونا معاكم، الله يصبرني على فرقاكم. او طالت الغيب وما نسيناكم، حبايب قلبي ولونا تضلون. الله عليهم الله عليهم. هدبت هدبت هدبت. يلا 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 يلا. هي 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 هي. الله على شباب الحرية. هلو 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 هلو. لك ميلي علي وعلي ميلي، وحبال الصابر صارت طويلي. وميلي علي وعلي ميلي، حبال الصابر صارت طويلي. لا بدي عيونك تبكي وتشكيلي، بس اخفي بحضني يمي العيون. العب يعيشون. هدبت. يا بيي الله يا عمرو. شبابك يا فلسطين احلى شباب. ارمي. هي هي هي. يغرك عمرك زمان وطيبه كل من بالدنيا ياخذ نصيبه ولا يغرك عمرك زمان وطيبه كل من في الدنيا ياخذ نصيبه ونياله يلي اخذ حبيبه الله يقضي العمر هنا وسروره يا بي العب العب يا عين يا ربي وين فريدة وين قولوا 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 هلا هلا هلا
Thank you, Art of Freedom, for sharing your love of dance with us. Now, as we are all aware, 2020 was a challenging year as we grappled with the COVID-19 pandemic. As the world reprogrammed itself to operate in many different ways, time, research, and energy were focused into finding solutions for new problems.
Our next speaker exemplifies just that. Dr. Pelagia Guma is a material scientist, professor, and inventor at The Ohio State University, who is finding new ways to tackle and detect COVID-19. Please welcome Dr. Pelagia Guma.
We have been living with COVID-19 for a year now. This is a terrible disease that has disrupted our lives all over the globe. Recently, I was told that I might have been exposed to COVID-19. So I went and I had a nasal swab, and then I had to self-quarantine for 10 days. And this process sounds familiar, doesn't it? What if I were to tell you that I didn't have to wait for the few days for the results from the nasal swab to come back, because I knew I didn't have COVID by exhaling once into a mouthpiece and within 15 seconds getting the results. Sounds like magic, right? Wrong. I am Perena Guma. I'm a professor of material science and engineering at The Ohio State University. The breath test for COVID-19 is my brainchild, and it has been 20 years in the making. I was a young assistant professor at SUNY Stony Brook, and that was around the year 2000, and I was working with novel materials for chemical sensors. Now, there was a lot of controversy in the community, in my research community, because they could not agree on which chemical was detecting by a simple material of a fixed composition. Now, we all know that if everything is the same in an experiment, then the outcomes will be the same. So something was obviously missing. Then I realized what was missing is the community didn't account for the variations in the crystal structure of the materials for a given composition. There is a technical term for this. It's called polymorphism, and it's used to indicate how materials change their crystal structure and the arrangement of the atoms in space, even for a given fixed composition. And you see the slide from left to the right here, 3 different polymorphs of a simple compound that is tungsten trioxide. They have different arrangements of the atoms in space, they have different morphologies, and therefore they have unique properties. So I took advantage of these unique properties of polymorphs, and I set out to make a career by making very selective chemical sensors that were specific to a given chemical. The first breakthrough was when I discovered and invented and I demonstrated a chemical sensor that was detecting ammonia gas in a very complex environment. The targeted application was for the Ford Motor Company to install it in the exhaust of automobiles, which is a very, very complex chemical environment. Now, this was the first of its kind as a sensor because it utilized materials that changed the electrical resistance in the presence of a particular gas that was ammonia, and it was doing that very, very fast. Now, like I said, breath is a very complex mixture, like automotive exhaust, and I was walking one day into a home goods store, and what I noticed was a gadgety thing like this device that you see in the bottom of the screen. And what struck, that was an alcohol breathalyzer. The one that you exhale to tell you if you've been intoxicated. What struck me was that this was a very small portable device, easy to use, and it was utilizing the same type of sensors I was developing in my research. The only difference was these were generic ones responding to many different gases, whereas I was developing very, very specific ones for a given chemical. What if I were to use my selective ammonia sensor to be used for detecting ammonia in breath? What if I were to make a medical device out of it? And this is how I set up to start studying breath-based diagnostics. So the way the breathalyzers work is, as you see in this slide, you capture a breath, a single exhale. There are 1,000 compounds in that, but you look for a single one, which we call a biomarker. So a biomarker is that chemical in the breath that detects a disease and signals a disease or a metabolic malfunction. And here you see, after you detect the ammonia, you measure the concentration, and you quantify it, and if it's in a normal range, someone is healthy. If it is not, someone has a disease. In this case, ammonia is a biomarker for renal diseases. So then, over the course of many, many years, I have published a lot of papers, and I have received a lot of patents on this work by developing one sensor for one biomarker for one type of disease. And the way, again, this breathalyzer sensor concept works is, as you see in the video here, you only get specific molecules of the specific compound to interact with the material. Just to give you an example, we're working with group A materials that target the nitric oxide, which is a biomarker for asthma and airway diseases. We have one type of portable handheld breathalyzer. I talked about the ammonia before. Then acetone is one other biomarker for metabolic disorders and for diabetes, and you use a different group of materials for that. And over the course of many, many years, I have made one sensor, one biomarker, one device. The next step is we're looking at different compounds and looking at different diseases. How about infectious diseases, which are very complex ones? So you cannot really identify them with a single biomarker. The idea there is this compound, these diseases, give you a signature in the breath, like we humans have a signature that identifies us. In a similar way, we have a signature, the diseases have a signature in the breath, which is manifested by the type of the biomarker and its relative concentration. And once biomarkers for a flu emerged, I was able to demonstrate the breathalyzer for flu. And that was around the year 2017. And it was very well received by the research community and got a lot of attention by the press too. Fast forward now to February of 2020, when I received a phone call from the White House. They asked me if I can modify my breathalyzer for flu to detect COVID-19. That was the most accelerating time for myself and for my research group, because now we were invited, we were called to contribute to the fight against this terrible disease, and doing that using my own technology, which was amazing. At the same time, it was extremely challenging because nobody knew much about SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 at the time. So I set out to find out biomarkers in the breath for the disease by finding the similarities and the differences between COVID-19 and the flu. So very soon I had identified few chemicals that we can target in the breath, and then I had to make sensors out of them, and then I had to make breathalyzers out of them. But of course, every time you do research, you have to have funding. So we went to the National Science Foundation, and we received a grant for this potentially transformative idea, which is the breath test for COVID-19. And the world took notice. So what happened? The challenges continue, because now we are in the middle of the pandemic, and of course now we are in lockdown. So we had to get special permission by the university, myself and two of my senior graduate students, to go and work in the lab and really put ourselves out there. We spent a lot of time, we made a lot of effort, and we started making all these sensors that detected these biomarkers. We had to validate them with gases that mimic human breath. And when we were ready for clinical testing, we got out there to fight SARS-CoV-2. We had a very good collaborator, Professor Matthew Exline from the Wexner Medical Center, who had been treating COVID-19 patients from the beginning. And here you see my team, and you see the three sensors in the breath device, the COVID-19 breath test. And in the next slide, you see the first consideration was to keep the staff, my staff, the clinical staff, safe. And for that, instead of just exhaling into the breathalyzer, we use these breath bags. Here you see them, they have been collecting breath from intubated patients in the intensive care unit. So that's how we started the clinical testing. We take 23 COVID positive and 23 non-COVID but sick people in the intensive care unit, and then we found the signature for COVID-19, and we did that with an accuracy of 96%, which was impressive. After we did this, we went down to the swab stations and we tested another more than 200 other people. Here you see how we collected the bag, and then here on the right you see how the bags interface with the breathalyzer, this small tiny device, portable handheld device over there. So what happens is the molecules of the chemicals from my breath interact with the sensor material and we get a signature. And the signature is the breath print for COVID-19, which is telling you that someone is positive, is sick. So we did that. We were very, very excited. And here you see the breath print of COVID-19, which is like the small Greek letter omega with 2 reducing and 1 oxidizing peak. And if you look at the middle peak, it's the intensity of that peak that tells you the severity of the disease. We were very, very excited because we have demonstrated now that we have a novel technology, novel nanotechnology for breath-based detection of COVID-19, and this happens with a single exhale and within just 15 seconds. Now, this is revolutionary because it allows us to open schools, test people in retail stores, in athletic venues, allow people to travel, and allow us to resume our normal life. So with this technology, we are also able to detect people that molecular testing seems to be failing, and there are recent reports that molecular tests cannot really get the asymptomatics and the ones that are early COVID. Therefore, there is a dire need for rapid testing of this type, and we have demonstrated this platform technology that is not only going to revolutionize public health, it's going also to create a platform for mitigating future threats by other emerging viruses in a non-intrusive, non-invasive manner and rapidly. And with this, I believe that you will agree with me that breath is the new assay for medical diagnostics, and I want to thank you very, very much.
What a powerful talk from Dr. Guma. Omer, isn't it remarkable to see where your passions can take you in the pursuit of knowledge?
It really is. And speaking of pursuing one's passions, I think you and our next speaker have something really unique in common. Didn't you work with sharks over the past few summers?
Yes, I did. Sharks, stingrays, sea turtles. The ocean and marine conservation have a very special place in my heart.
Okay, see, that's what I thought, because when it comes to things that bite and sting, well, let's just say our next speaker has dealt with a whole lot of different animals in his line of work.
He is an American YouTube personality with over 18 million subscribers to his YouTube channel, Brave Wilderness. He has traveled far and wide on his Animal Planet show, taking viewers alongside him to witness some of the worst bites and stings that you can imagine.
That's right, Maddie. When someone says, "bite me," this guy takes it literally. An OSU alum, wildlife educator, and content creator, please give an exciting welcome to our next speaker, Coyote Peterson.
If you like animals, there's a good chance you've come across my work on the Brave Wilderness YouTube channel. That, or you might simply recognize me as that guy in the cowboy hat who's been bitten or stung by some of our planet's most horrific-looking creatures. I have a pretty crazy job, but I absolutely love it. And I do what I do because I love animals. Now, I'm willing to bet that each and every one of you has at some point in life been fascinated with animals. Maybe it was the roaring power of a lion, the seemingly menacing jaws of a shark, or the adorable nature of a baby bear. Animals are a part of the world that we live in, and it's impossible to not recognize their existence. It's even fair to think that at some point, you may have been enchanted by a certain species. If you dig deep, I'm sure you will find that moment which sparked what I call the golden age of animals, which I believe is an inherent fascination for the non-human creatures that inhabit our planet. This fascination usually begins at a young age and typically centers around a key moment or interaction with an animal. The spark ignited for me at a very young age, and to this day is still rooted as my very first animal memory. I grew up on a farm in northeastern Ohio, and at the age of 2 years old, I was one day tagging along with my mom to help feed the animals when all of a sudden I found myself witnessing the birth of a baby horse. Now at this age, I wasn't necessarily saying much in the way of brilliant statements, but the sight of one horse seemingly pooping out another horse was definitely worth exclaiming at the top of my lungs. And I started screaming, "Baby horsey! Baby horsey! Mommy, that big horse is pooping out a baby horsey." Now, the sight was something I would definitely never forget. And this moment truly marks for me the moment where the golden age of animals was born. From that day onward, I became obsessed with animals. All of them, from alligators to wolverines and every living creature in between. The stranger and more mysterious, the better. I read books, I collected toys, I drew and hung scribbled illustrations on my bedroom walls. When outside, I would spend countless hours exploring the wilderness behind my house as it documented frogs, turtles, snakes, and a menagerie of other creepy creatures. For over a decade, I lived in the golden age of animals. And then one day, without even realizing it, I began to grow up. I was going through an evolution, right? And by the age of 13, the radiating glimmer from the golden age of animals was beginning to fade, and I was getting over my love for the natural world. I wanted to be like the other kids, hang out with the boys and play sports. And see, here's the thing. In my school, the other kids weren't necessarily into animals, so it makes sense that I didn't want to be seen as that strange kid who was always playing in swamps. And I mean, come on, let's be honest. Once you get into high school and the world of dating begins, it's not exactly the most romantic icebreaker to ask a girl if she wants to go play in the mud and catch snapping turtles on a Friday night. But here's the funny thing about the golden age of animals. It never really goes away. It might go dormant, but it can always be woken back up. My alarm clock rang loudly in the form of a man by the name of Steve Irwin. He broke into American media in 1996 as the crocodile hunter, and to this day is celebrated as one of the greatest voices for animal conservation that the world has ever known. It was his love for the natural world that helped to rekindle my fascination with animals. To me, Steve was just as big as a movie star or a professional athlete, and he got there by celebrating animals. The success of Steve's career was definitely a strong influence, and as he was bringing animals to millions of people across the world, I found myself in college trying to decide on a career of my own. I went to the Ohio State University and decided to pursue an education in the art of filmmaking. Now, the reason I chose this career path is I wanted to understand how to make an audience feel the way that I felt every time I watched a movie. How do you make them laugh, cry, or feel a wave of emotion that they can't seem to explain? Over the course of 4 years, I worked to perfect my degree in screenwriting, producing, and directing. While at the same time, I was constantly paying attention to the work that Steve was doing in the world of animals. At the time, I didn't necessarily recognize the influence, but Steve was subtly rekindling my love for the natural world, and the golden age of animals was once again beginning to glimmer. For a decade, Steve brought us animals in a way that the world had never seen. And then tragically, on September 4th, 2006, the world lost one of its greatest voices for animals. I'll never forget the day that we lost Steve, and it hit me, as if I lost a friend, a parent, or maybe better put, a hero. I don't know what it was exactly, but in the months following the passing of Steve, I couldn't stop dwelling on my love for animals. And I harbored a deep sorrow for all the children who, like me, had lost their hero, the person who was bringing them the joy and wonder of animals. It didn't take me long before I realized what it was that I had to do. Take my own love for animals and combine it together with my education in storytelling and filmmaking so that I could carry on that torch that Steve had lit. I truly believed that this was my calling, and I went for it. From that day on, 100% of everything that I had went into building what is now Brave Wilderness. Over the course of a decade, my team and I worked to bring Brave Wilderness to life. And trust me, building an internationally recognized wildlife brand didn't happen overnight. It's been a constant uphill climb, But with a clear vision, we continue to work our butts off week after week, month after month, and year after year to bring people the up-close animal encounters that they had grown to love. We always had a clear vision right from the start, to be a platform for conservation and education, mixed in, of course, with a healthy dose of entertainment. Through our wilderness megaphone, we were able to become a voice for the strange, bizarre, and misunderstood species that could not speak for themselves, and we proudly brought their stories to the world. I could spend hours telling you tales about the larger-than-life encounters I've been fortunate enough to have with some of our planet's most iconic species, from sharks to whales, bears, wolves, lions, elephants, and so on. I could also tell you countless tales about the intentional bites and stings that I've taken over the years, which are unquestionably our most famous episodes. For some reason, people love to watch Coyote Peterson rolling around on the ground in agonizing pain. And while it's rewarding to have episodes that have racked up tens of millions of views, it's actually our episodes that push to make a difference for misunderstood species that mean the most to me. And here's an example of what I mean. This past year, my team and I produced an episode titled For the Love of Wolves. Now, it's fair to say that the wolf is one of our planet's most misunderstood and wrongly vilified animal species. And at certain points in history, they've even been driven to near extinction simply based on the idea that as humans, we have feared them. I got to work with the Colorado Wolf and Wildlife Center, and over the course of a week was able to enter into an enclosure with wolves and truly connect with them. It's one of the most meaningful animal experiences I have ever had, and the connection was so strong between me and these animals that I was even given a kiss. That's right, I was kissed by a wolf. Makes you realize that they aren't necessarily bloodthirsty killers, doesn't it? I mention this experience because it serves as an example of what Brave Wilderness is trying to do. Create a new look and understanding for the animals that we were once afraid of, so we can better recognize the importance they have on our planet. I believe it's moments like these that will truly influence future conservationists by igniting the golden age of animals. And here's an example of what I mean. In 2020, Brave Wilderness participated in a fundraiser for the conservation of rhinos, one of our planet's most threatened species. And of the hundreds of people who participated in raising support, it was actually a 7-year-old boy by the name of Drew who managed to fundraise the largest amount. Now, Drew worked tirelessly for weeks doing research, and then he built a pitch deck which he used as his rubric to help garner donations. At only 7 years old, he is already dedicated to his mission, and I believe he will go on to do great things for the world of animal conservation. Drew is youthful proof that the golden age of animals exists and is now stronger than ever. The conservation of species has never been more important than it is today. And while there are thousands of hardworking people leading the charge, we all need to help the youth believe in their love for animals so that they can carry it forward into the future. Steve Irwin proved to me that the golden age of animals never dies. It might go dormant, but we all have the ability to wake it back up. I'm encouraging you to embrace this same idea that had such an impact on my life. Awaken your inner love for animals, and whether you choose to actively make a difference for our planet species or not, we all have the ability to influence the future generations around us. Kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, and even neighbors. Because it's our youth that will ultimately make the biggest difference for the future of our planet and the animals that call it home. Thank you.
A big thank you to Coyote for letting us tag along on your adventure.
Before our final speaker, I want to ask you all a question. Have you ever tried to grow a garden? It's not as easy as it looks. Of course, gardening is more than just seeds, pots, and soil. It's about understanding how the plant grows, paying attention to its environment, and even building community at grassroots level.
Just as we cultivate plants to sustain our bodies, we also find parallels between our growth as people and the cultivation of social movements. Dr. Kip Curtis is an Ohio State environmental historian who is passionate about community empowerment through food systems and microfarming. His work deals with the intersections between social justice, land grants, and sustainability.
Please join us in welcoming our final speaker of the afternoon, Dr. Kip Curtis.
You might not know this, but land grants can change lives. I want to tell you about my friend Walt Bonham. When I first met Walt 3 years ago, he was looking for an opportunity. He was working for a small juice bar startup in downtown Mansfield, Ohio, his hometown. But that was no place for a man with Walt's skill and abilities. This guy has a business degree, and he's managed more than a dozen employees at a time in his life. He was hustling for this tiny little startup for what amounted to less than minimum wage because he'd been served a terrible injustice. A few years ago, he was finishing up a business meeting when all of a sudden, out of the blue, 4 men started to harass the sister of the man that he was meeting with, who was waiting for them in a car outside of the bar. Walt rushed out to their defense, to her defense, and he found himself suddenly being faced down by 2 very large, very drunk, very angry white men who backed him up across the parking lot and then pounced on him. They started kicking and punching. Now, Walt warned them off, and he was scared for his life. And 2 things you need to know about this night. First, even though Walt was at a bar, he had not been drinking. Because second, he was carrying a gun. Something he'd done legally for the previous 9 years. And Walt feared for his life. And the men were punching and kicking, and so he pulled his gun and he started to fire. And even though he hit one of the men twice, the assault continued. And they overpowered Walt, and they took his gun from him, and they turned it on him. Now, Walt knew he'd emptied all 5 chambers before they got the gun from him, but the men did not. And then the police arrived, and things went from bad to worse for Walt. Because even though he was so injured from this assault that he spent several days in the hospital, he was the only one arrested that night, and he was charged with a second-degree felony. Long story short, Walt didn't have the resources to mount the kind of defense that this case required, and the lawyer he hired didn't tell him as much, and he showed up on the day of the trial to learn that his lawyer wasn't calling any witnesses and had allowed a jury of all white, non-gun owners to be seated. So Walt told me he knew if he let the trial go forward that day, he was not walking out of that courtroom a free man. So he was essentially coerced into pleading to a lesser 4th-degree violent felony charge, a charge that wouldn't come with any jail time, but a charge that would prevent him from ever getting a job again. And when Walt realized that he was unemployable, he returned to his hometown of Mansfield and he started looking for an opportunity. And that's when I met him in the sandwich shop. He was just looking for an opportunity. And I'd been thinking a lot about the value of opportunity in those days, about opportunity as a kind of social justice. Because I'd been thinking a lot about justice and what it means to bring justice. And I noticed a couple of things. The first is that we often conclude that simply removing that injustice is sufficient to deal with the harm that it's done. So you might think about slavery, terrible injustice. We ended slavery. Or Jim Crow segregation, also terrible injustice, and we made it illegal. But I'm not sure that's ever enough. Because second, the most egregious injustices keep happening to the same groups of people in the United States over time. And I'm speaking now as a U.S. historian. These things keep happening to African Americans and Native Americans. And so I was wondering whether removing the injustice was ever sufficient in itself. And I was thinking about where opportunity might fit in the matrix of social justice and human improvement. As a U.S. historian, I knew that land-grant universities like the Ohio State University, where I worked, had been critical social justice institutions in the 19th century. They prepared a nation of 18th century farmers for the opportunities of the 20th century world. I mean, if you think about it, opportunity as social justice is kind of the land-grant DNA. And so I'd been thinking about how I might enlist urban food systems as precisely this kind of economic opportunity. And I'd already been working with Deanna West Torrance another Mansfield native and the founder and executive director of the North End Community Improvement Collaborative. Deanna had already led her community through a planning process in which they had identified food systems as a viable, asset-based economic development solution, something that they wanted to do. And Deanna had already started building community gardens, and she'd already started training urban farmers. Deanna and I were both interested in food systems because we were interested in finding a more just solution to the problem of food insecurity. We both knew that the delivery of that free box of tomatoes was insufficient to address the real cause there, which was in fact household wealth or income. Enter the Microfarm Project, an urban farming project created by a land grant to deliver social justice by capturing food dollars to grow individual and household wealth in food insecure communities. It starts with the Microfarm, a right-sized urban production site, small enough for an individual or a household to operate, large enough to bring a profit. The right size is about 1/3 of an acre, 5,500 square feet of growing area, half of which is under 2 high tunnels for extended season grow. The Microfarm is successful because it focuses on growing the very most popular crops. So the things on everybody's grocery list: tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots, greens. There's about 12 crops in all. But a single microfarm is too small by itself to be successful, and we knew this. The microfarm only becomes successful when it's part of a system of microfarms, which can aggregate production from multiple sites. And this is accomplished through an old school farmer cooperative, a microfarmer cooperative. The cooperative can then buy, aggregate, brand, and market the produce, ideally before a plant even goes in the ground. And the cooperative marketer can in this way coordinate crop plans with buyer needs, creating a whole lot more certainty for our farmers and for our buyers. And the whole system is designed to simplify farming so our microfarm producers can focus on growing the very best quality produce that they can. When the whole system is in full operation, a microfarm has the potential of delivering up to $35,000 of supplemental household income. Those are real dollars in places where dollars are needed. Microfarming in opportunity-poor households to deliver wealth in food insecure neighborhoods. And this isn't just an abstract idea. Since 2019, Deanna and I have been building this system into the landscape of Mansfield, Ohio, with a $1 million matching grant that Ohio State University received from the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. We wanted to see if the idea had legs. And what a ride it's been. Since 2019, we've trained 12 new microfarm producers to grow market-quality crops. We have built 10 new microfarms in Mansfield and the surrounding countryside for these farmers to work in. And my microfarm producers have already served up hundreds of pounds of fresh, local, organic produce to households and cafeterias and restaurants from Mansfield to Columbus. And they've provided an additional hundreds of pounds of surplus for the food insecure households that surround these microfarms in the community. We prepare for 2021 with the whole system for the very first time, fully in place, ready to see what it can do. 10 new microfarm businesses owning 1 new farmer cooperative, the Richland Grow Up, as part of a community university vision of urban agriculture for economic development. The Ohio State University will continue to provide and leverage its research expertise and its commitment to social justice to ensure this project is a success. And we hope to provide a new model of urban farming that can deliver wealth in the places in the United States where wealth is needed, and hopefully to model the kinds of community engagements that land-grant universities should be participating in. And my friend Walt Bonham, He formed a business called the Food Lab, and he trained to be one of our microfarm producers. When the Ohio State University needed a contractor to source and assemble our microfarms, Walt Bonham's Food Lab bid for and won that contract. So when I put in my first microfarm on the Ohio State Mansfield campus back in 2017, it took me about 3 months to put that thing in. Walt Bonham's Food Lab put those things up now in 3 days. When Deanna West Torrance was gifted 12 acres of industrial brownfield, she needed a manager to prepare that site for her, to put in electricity and water, and to build, assemble, and manage 4 microfarms. She hired the Food Lab, and Walt Bonham got the NECIC Urban Farm built. NECIC was happy over the last few years when its farmers market would bring in $2,000 in sales. Last summer, they brought in over $17,000 in sales, and we're just getting started. Walt Bonham's Food Lab is one of the 10 microfarm producers in the Richland Grow-Op, and so he provides his share of the needed aggregate for the market. And the Food Lab is about to go under contract with the Richland Grow-Op to provide a strategic operations and marketing plan to ensure their success in 2021 and beyond. So my friend Walt Bonham is no longer looking for an opportunity. Ohio State University provided an opportunity, and Walt Bonham seized it. And now he's creating opportunity for his own neighborhood. And he's building wealth. Wealth for himself, for his family, and for his community. Now, Walt has not resolved the legal injustice that set him back a few years ago. But guess what? He's soon going to have the means to try. And he's just one of several inspiring microfarm stories that are blooming right now in Mansfield, Ohio, and proof that land grants can change lives. So stay tuned. And while it's pretty obvious, I'm really excited about the microfarm project and about my friend Walt and about his successes. The real story here is about land grants and social justice. When the Morrill Land Grant Act was passed in 1862, it delivered social justice by providing opportunity. It prepared a nation of 18th century farmers for the opportunities of the industrial world. We stand at a similar inflection point today. And if land-grant universities looked around their communities and they identified geographies where people were most at risk, and they worked with those communities to develop sustainable systems to mitigate those risks, like the microfarm system, and bring opportunity and deliver social justice, they will have ample work to fulfill the promise of the land-grant university in the 21st century. Thank you.
A big thank you to Dr. Kip Curtis for teaching us a little more about sprouting social change. And also thank you to all of our speakers and performers over these past 2 days. This has truly been a weekend of seeking information and challenging the status quo.
And while TEDx Ohio State University has our wonderful main stage event, we also host a number of salon events throughout the year. These salon events focus on specific topics that showcase various speakers on a common theme. Join us for Take Flight on April 21st in partnership with the School of Environmental and Natural Resources, the Environmental Professionals Network, and the Monarch Joint Venture. For more information about this event and all of our future events, be sure to follow us on our social media platforms.
Omer and I would like to take this opportunity to thank you so much for sharing in this weekend with us, and we are so grateful to have served as your MCs for this conference.
We hope that today and yesterday have shed some light on the incredible work being done, and the work still left to do, and that you leave this conference with a sense of curiosity and an eagerness to keep the conversation going.
The topics discussed these past 2 days don't just end here. They start with the speakers, and they continue with you.
So we ask you, as you look to the future, what kind of difference do you want to make?
We challenge you to look closer, think bigger, and reach farther. Because the closer we look, the bigger we think, and the farther we reach.
Well, Who knows what lies just beyond the horizon? Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in with us this weekend. In years past, TEDx Ohio State University has hosted our events in person in Columbus, Ohio. And while our team is very excited to return to this format in the coming years, for those of you who are viewing out of town, we do offer a live streaming day of our event. If you're interested in staying updated with our future events and what this organization is up to, you can follow us on all social media platforms at TEDxOhioStateU. This event was a team effort, and I could not have done it without the hard work and dedication of our undergraduate team. And while I cannot invite them with me right now on stage to take a bow, if you know a TEDx Ohio State University member, be sure to congratulate them on a spectacular job well done. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you again next year.